Welcome to Beyond the Portrait. What if I told you that wonder and play were responsible for keeping your brain young? Have you ever struggled with perfectionist tendencies or a high achiever, or you're just too busy and you're exhausted? Well, you're in luck. Today, our wonderful guest, Irene Salter, who has a PhD in neuroscience and also is so relatable and was a teacher for many years. So she explains science and the way that the brain works in a really easy to understand way. You're going to really like this conversation, and you're absolutely going to take home some takeaways that you can put into your life right away. So without further ado, Irene Salter. I'm so excited you're here.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, this is going to be
so much
fun.
for inviting me.
Oh, of
That
course.
was so kind and so exciting.
Oh, well, I'm delighted you're here. And I think that this is going to be so much fun, and it's going to really be helpful for people. And yeah, I'm excited. So thank you for being here and spending some time with me.
Hey, anytime at all. I kept saying you should come over and visit me, or I need to come visit you or something.
Absolutely.
What? It's been about a year, right? Since we
Yeah.
actually saw each other in person in Barcelona.
Yes, it's been a year, and we are well overdue for a catch up. So I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, lots has happened.
A lot has happened. So I'm having everybody say what their name is, say what their pronouns are, and kind of like a little bit about them.
All right. Well, name Irene Salter, pronouns she, he, she, all the girly stuff. Let's see. A little bit about me. Well, I'm a leadership coach, neuroscientist, writer, and mom, and wife, and friend, community member. And it's funny because I think about all of those roles as just different facets of my identity. And at the heart of it is this desire to help people thrive. Like, I want to be the thrive girl. How can I help everybody in the entire world just thrive a little bit better?
Well, if anybody can do it, it's you, a neuroscientist with all of your life hacks. It's your life hacks are so relatable, and so I'm so excited to get to talk about some of them today. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, so let's get into some of these questions. So, I have here. I want you to kind of think about your childhood and some core memories and how they've impacted how you see the world.
Well, I grew up in New York. I was born in New York. In Mount Kisco, a little tiny town, like in a White Plains-ish. Then I moved to Dallas, Texas for second grade to eighth grade. Then I moved to Hawaii. And I think my real formative years were second to eighth grade when I was in Dallas. And it was really shaped by the fact that I didn't really fit in. Like come on, Asian girl, in the middle of Dolly Parton, permed hair and whatnot. And no matter how much I permed my hair or got the braces to straighten the teeth or the cotillion, I took freaking cotillion classes. I can't believe it. None of it was really the thing that would let me belong. And so I have always had this big, deep need for belonging. And so I would achieve that through impressing my teachers, impressing my parents, a lot of high achiever, must get the A+ on every single assignment kind of stuff, which I did. But then there was also the how can I fit in with all the peers? And it was probably in between 6th and 7th grade, I went to a summer camp. And it was a summer camp. It was like one of those high achieving kid ones over at Duke University. I loved it because I finally fit in. It was people that got me, people who would want to take a psychology class or a physics class over the summer and think it's the coolest thing ever. And then we played spades all night and played capture the flag in the dark. I mean, it was just a place where I fit in. I didn't fit in all of the other ways. And it was the first time I realized the power of being your authentic self and letting all of those different facets of your identity shine through. And finally, when I moved to Hawaii, I started to experiment more with how can I then bring all of those different facets, the ones that were truly me, not the ones that were me pretending to fit in me. How can I bring that more to the surface? And I think that that's been a lifelong journey, but I definitely remember that it was in those moments, being an understanding of, oh, like, yes, I love the academics. Yes, I love the science. But yes, I also love the play and I love the games and I love people who get me and deep ideas, like talking about really interesting physics and science and ideas and politics and really good literature. Those were the kinds of things that just lit me up. And I didn't have that community in Dallas, and I've been finding it ever since.
I love that. I mean, I think, we have that in common and I think we would have been friends for sure. It's like, 'cause I definitely was like a little nerd who like read books all day,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and I didn't really fit either. So I think that that's probably why we've connected so much. So,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. And, I forgot to put this on our outline, but I really wanted to talk about post-traumatic growth. And I
Oh,
think that,
yeah.
like what I've been realizing through some of these interviews is, a lot of these like core kind of childhood wounds end up becoming our superpowers. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and that just I keep finding that. And it's like, it's like either a form of alchemy or transmutation. And, it's like, but it's like, I love hearing from like a science perspective about like that post-traumatic growth. What can you
Yeah.
share about that?
So, post traumatic growth is a very recent topic that's being studied now in psychology research and literature. Um, Before probably, I don't know, 2000, it wasn't even a term. It was always post traumatic stress or post traumatic depression. Those were the big things because everybody, psychology wise, in the, you know, from 1900 until 2000, it was always how can we fix what's broken? What is the entirety of like the broken human psyche. And in the last 25 years, it's been a complete transformation of psychology to introduce the idea of what's called positive psychology. And not just the way that things are broken, but how things are good and how things can get fixed and what does human thriving look like. And a huge part of that is the idea that there is post traumatic growth, that everybody experiences traumas, a death in the family, all of the early childhood experience type of things. We experience those, and it's a natural part of just being a human being. And what was not recognized is that, yes, in a certain number of cases, it goes wrong and you get post traumatic stress or post traumatic depression. But in the vast majority of cases, those are the key learning experiences that allow us to change, allow us to grow, and allow us to see ourselves with more clarity and with greater understanding. And so, what they find is that after these traumatic events and after the kind of processing that we do through them, that we become different people in a better way. And so now they're finally putting some energy into understanding what that is and what that looks like and how much more that happens versus the downsides. And this is why when I teach about strengths, like kind of what are your inner strengths, most leadership coaches stop with the kind of strengths finder surveys. But I think that one of the most important ones is those hard won experiences, the hard won lessons that we know because of the shit that the universe has thrown at us and that we've had to overcome. And so for my own self, things like, stress resilience has been a huge one. How to let go of perfectionism, that's another huge one. How to achieve in healthy ways so that I can feed that part of me that loves that, but not to like push, 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 push. And I mean, there's so many things that the yucky stuff in life forces us to transform. And I think probably the heart of all of it is like transforming some of my relationships with my parents and with my mother in particular, like figuring out ways to forgive and heal and like not have that be the core of my identity has been huge and it's been wonderful.
I mean, that's amazing because you're an eldest child, right? So you're an eldest child
And
and an eldest daughter. So there's always
mhm.
those expectations, right?
Yeah.
And
And
go ahead.
well, I mean, in Asian cultures,
Yeah.
right? It's the eldest child that carries on the family legacy. And it's a weight that falls onto your shoulders. And there are very clear expectations and ideals that in an Asian household. So my parents, they were the first ones to emigrate to the United States, fleeing the Cultural Revolution. And so they moved to United States with this huge American dream. And a huge part of that was to allow their children to get an education and then to achieve into the higher ranks of society. And the push to like get all A's, to go to Stanford, to like be in the Ivy Leagues, to have this kind of idealized career, to have the big house with the 2 kids and the, fancy cars, like all of that were put upon the children. And it's not just the eldest daughter. Eldest sons get it even worse than I do. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that culturally it's a big thing. And all of my friends that are like Asian are like highly, highly talented and very, very smart and have a lot of like perfection tendencies and high achievement. And I'm an eldest daughter and I'm not Asian, but I think a lot of times as an eldest child and the eldest daughter, you sometimes can get like parentified. And
yeah.
so, there's that,
Mm-hmm.
but then also it's like those expectations. So I think that's why I bonded when we met because so you gave us, so for the listener, Irene gave this like baller talk that I got to be in the audience for, and it was about how to find her anger. And I
Yeah.
really, if you are okay with sharing it, I would love for you to like kind of, you don't have to give the full talk, but just kind of like give about a little bit about that experience. Cause I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially high achiever, gold star kind of people like me.
Well, so it was all born out of that early childhood upbringing and my tendency to focus entirely on my mind and the achievement that that would bring to me and the success as defined by all of those expectations that that would bring me. So with all of that, I bottled up the emotional side. So whenever it came to my feelings, my anger, my sadness, my fears, all of that got literally jarred up and bottled. I don't know if you've seen Inside Out 2, but like that's the crux of that movie. And that was me. Like I was driven by anxiety and I just took all of the joy, the delight, and the natural human like emotions, especially anger, and I just bottled them all up. And so when I was trying to sort through some of those feelings that I had about my parents and my upbringing, I was working with an amazing somatic leadership coach. And her name is Jay Fields. She's a rock star. And she said, I'm going to send you out into the desert for a medicine walk. And me, scientist, goes like, okay, that is so woo woo. I don't even know what I'm going to do with this. But she said, look, it's an opportunity to explore your emotional landscape and to do it physically, embodied. And so she said, act out your emotions. So bring up anger in particular. If that's the one that's been bottled up the most, that's the one that you need to find. And I want you to go find your anger in the desert. So she sent me to this wilderness area and she said, act it out. Like figure out every single action verb that relates to anger and do it. So swear, kick, scream, throw. So I started by throwing rocks. So I threw rocks for like, I don't know, 5 minutes. And I just threw and I threw and like all these feelings started boiling up, anger and frustration about just all the injustices in the world, the injustices that were done to me, sexual harassment, just all of the yuck that we've lived through, that I've lived through, all came bubbling to the surface. And I was so mad, like I was seeing red. And there was a moment in the middle of all of that where I entered into this like green clearing. Like I stumbled out from all of this yucky tangles of brush. And it was this beautiful green clearing in the middle of the desert, which was shocking and amazing. So I wandered into it and I was kind of exploring. And there in the middle was a piece of rusted farm equipment of some kind. It was like some tractor that had broken down and just been left there. And because I had released so much anger, like that bubbled up again. And I was so mad. So I ripped and I tore at this thing until a huge piece broke off. And then I like landed on my butt on the dirt. And I was thinking, what the hell do I do with this? I can't leave this in the middle of this gorgeous field. So, of course, I dragged this back. I'm so angry. I'm so frustrated. I'm crying. I fear for the people who saw me on the path. And I got back to my coach, and she told me a fairy tale. She said, like, once upon a time, a woman went out to the desert to find her anger. And she found her soul in the middle of this emerald clearing. And in it, she found the remnants of the armor she had been wearing her whole life. And I mean, I have chills talking about it.
Yeah,
like, I
it's
just
really
broke
beautiful.
down because, yes, like, I had been living behind armor that I had constructed. It was like a cage I had constructed around myself that prevented me from full feeling. And ever since then, I've been practicing and allowing myself to become whole, to have that emerald clearing side of me be able to have its full expression and to shine through, and to allow my emotions to flow so much more naturally rather than being dammed up behind a wall.
I mean, I can certainly relate to that,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like having, that kind of barrier and having a lot of trauma that like lives in your body, it's like,
Yeah.
and having like a mind body disconnect, it's like, because
Yes.
when your confidence is only in your achievements, then everything else you kind of forget, or not forget, but like you said, kind of repress, it's like, so,
Yeah.
but to live a full life, you have to have all of the experiences,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. I love that story. Thank you for sharing. I think that's a
You're
lot of
welcome.
people, at least for me, I'm like, that was for me, so if it only helped me, I'm happy to, to hear it again. So, but I want to talk too about, so you went to Stanford, you got a
Yeah.
PhD in neuroscience, and so you initially spent years researching, and then
Mm-hmm.
you took like a sabbatical, right? Because your husband he'd gotten some sort of like delayed something with school, and so you went and traveled, right? Talk
Mm-hmm.
about that.
So, this was before I had kind of realized what my true passions were. So I was following the lovely little linear path of success, which was get my degree from Stanford. And of course, like in the middle of that, get a master's degree while I'm getting my bachelor's in 4 years, because that's what you do. And then I went straight into a PhD program. So I studied neuroscience at UC San Francisco. I really loved some aspects of the research. Again, it was putting me into community with like these brilliant scientists where we could have these fabulous and so fascinating conversations about brain and behavior, because that's where I was interested. I was interested in how does the brain allow us to learn, to feel, to be motivated. It's very funny, me bottling up my emotions and then me studying emotions with my cognitive mind. Not probably a surprise,
Not
but
lost on me, Irene.
yeah, yeah, no. Anyway, so in that, after my PhD, I had lined up this postdoctoral fellowship that was going to take me to Cambridge, England, to study with this amazing hotshot researcher who was combining genetics research with neuroscience, like the coolest cutting edge stuff ever. But my fiance, husband now, he was applying for the London School of Business and got waitlisted. So we decided to defer. So I deferred my fellowship, and we decided to take a year because this was post 9/11, and we wanted to reconnect with all the people that mattered to us. So we started to travel. So we traveled up and down the East Coast, the West Coast. We went on a like excursion over to Asia, to India, and it was so interesting because when I finally could step back from that nice little linear path and I could see myself more clearly, and I think what was happening is you have these two parts of your brain. You have your what's called your central executive network. and then you have your default mode network. So each one of them are these interconnected brain areas. And the central executive, that's the one that drives problem solving, goal directed actions. It's the one that you use every day for like work and school and, getting through and getting your to-do list done. But then the default mode, that's the one that comes out when you're mind wandering and you're exploring and you're having daydreams. I never let myself do that until like that year. I finally was able to have all of these deep experiences in my default mode. And it was connecting with people and wandering the world. And then when I could look back on myself, I could see myself more clearly. I could see that all of that central executive achievement oriented stuff, I enjoyed it. I was good at it, but it didn't light me up. And the thing that lit me up was teaching. Like I loved teaching. And so I took a complete left turn and I became a middle school science teacher. And it was the best move that I'd ever made. Like it was really, really hard, but I'm so happy to consider myself a science educator because that's really where my passion lies.
Well, and I love that you pivoted, right? You knew that you loved certain things and that you like, I think a lot of people have goals in mind and they do things because they think that they're supposed to. They've got their parents that they're trying to impress and they have a lot of, internal validation that they get by achievement. And to be like, actually, I'm not going to go study in Cambridge and I'm going to go teach middle school kids. Like that took some balls, It's like, so I think that that's cool that you've done that. And that like, that's also, I think why you're like, I was so excited to like interview you because you talk about science in a way that like it's easy for someone like I love science. I don't know much about science because I took, I'm a photography like major, so like I have my BFA in photography, it's like, so I mean, photography used to be taught in the physics department, but not when I was there. So there are science aspects, but it's like, but I really love learning about how the world works and how the brain works, and neuroscience I think is so fascinating, but it can often, it's amazing, it's like, but I think for a lot of people, it's difficult because, the more scientific it sounds and the drier it sounds, your brain's like, it's like, but you do it in a way that's really fun and really relatable. So, I think it's a gift. It's a gift of yours. And so it makes me think actually, so when we very, very first met, thinking about neuroscience. So I'm someone who is always thinking. I am figuring things out. It's like, which is why I love you so much. So, but when we first met, I was like, Irene, I have the theory that I would like to bounce off of you. And you were very nice to humor me. But I had realized, living in New York, that I have friends that are all different ages. And I was really thinking about it because I'm like, why is it that I have friends that are in their 50s and 60s and 70s and they seem the same as me? And then I think about people that I know from back home. I think about my mom. I think about my grandparents, they're not alive anymore, my grandparents, but I think about them and they don't have that kind of same, enthusiasm for life. And so I kind of realized, living in New York, you can't really turn your brain off, right? Like when you're coming home from work, you can't just go into like autopilot. And I remember when I lived in Utah, like I would drive home from work or from school and you wouldn't even remember how you got there. You would just get there, right? Your brain just turns off. But in New York, you'll get hit by a bus, you'll get hit by, hit by a bike, and it's like, so there's no kind of, you have to kind of have your wits about you. And I think that there is that, but then also I live in New York, so there's museums and there's the ballet and there's concerts and there's just so much wonder and information. And so I kind of suspected that the reason why brains for me seemed younger in metropolitan cities was because of the, constant state of wonder and, like not having too much of the same routine, So what did you say when I told you that?
I don't remember what I said, but I know exactly what I think now. And in the last year, I've been doing a lot more thinking about what play does to our brains. Because, I mean, obviously I started my podcast, which is all about the leader's playground and how do you make work more like play. But it reminds me so much of this research that was done on enriched environments for rats and other animals versus an unenriched environment. And what happens is that you can have a rat in a standard lab cage, which is basically sawdust. You put a couple like cardboard tubes for them to chew on. You have some bedding material. You have your food and your water. Basic, right? Well, for hundreds of years, that's the way that, you would keep your lab rats. But then they started to look at, well, that's not a very accurate way of understanding what play might be doing to brains. So instead, they transitioned because there was one researcher who kept pet rats at home in addition to the lab rats at work, and recognized that the ones that he kept at home, which had sometimes run of his house, he would sometimes sit on mom's shoulder, that, he would play with, that those rats with toys and other friends to play with had a much different experience and were more curious. They learned better. They learned faster. They had like an engaged way of interacting with the world. And Altman was his name. And he revolutionized our thinking about how brains, when we get older, work. Because before, neuroscientists thought that we don't actually grow new brain cells when we're adults, that you got what you've got after probably in your 20s and you live with it. No new brain cells. Well, Altman started to research and he started to look and he started to find in adult brains of the rats that had been in more enriched environments that they kept birthing new neurons. And so what I think is happening is when you are in an enriched environment, even into adulthood, you get new neurons. And they're finding this now with people. Like Altman started it, understanding it with rats, but now we understand it with people. And it's these new environments and these new experiences that we have that keep us growing and learning and youthful in the ways that we engage in the world. So I think you are absolutely right in that. The add-on, though, that I'm noticing in my own life is I don't live in an urban environment at all.
Right.
So I'm here in a town that has like 3,000 people. 3,000 people. It's a teeny tiny little small town, but I can create all of the enriched opportunities that I want. I just have to be more intentional about it. I have to like surround myself with the interesting people and the interesting conversations. Last weekend, I had the person who wrote the Tahiti Lonely Planet guide here.
Oh, cool.
And she runs a pearl farm. We had the most fascinating conversation ever. So it's like I bring these people that allow me to have the dinner table conversations that I want. And of course, nature itself is this amazing place to explore. I just have to get my butt out of my door and out of this chair in order to go explore it.
I mean, I love that because truthfully, it's like, it's one of those things where like in the city, you're like kind of, it's just like so easily accessible, right? And you're kind of like forced to. But this is something that you can create new neural pathways and keep a younger brain wherever you live. You do not have to like live in a city, but it's information that it's like a science experiment, it's like, it kind of makes you think about it. Cause like, that's the thing. I know plenty of people that are also like very like, fresh and young at heart, that don't live in cities, but I think it's because they are prioritizing play and they are prioritizing new experiences. And so like now it's like, it's actually like required. Like you need to like make it a priority. You have to have fun. You have to play. You have to have new things. It's for your brain. It's for your brain. If you want a young brain, then you need to have new experiences and play. And I think too, we were talking about post-traumatic growth. So I have CPTSD. And so one of my assignments from my psychiatrist, because I tried taking medication and it didn't work. And so we realized that it was not chemical for me. And so one of my assignments was I had to do 3 fun things a week. And for someone who's a recovering workaholic, that was really challenging. And and I think too, and I think that this is the reason why I bring this up too, is you kind of study play. And for someone who is so high functioning, you probably didn't play a lot either when you were younger, it's like, and that's why you believe in it. And so I think that It's something that I had to talk to my therapist about. I talked about to my psychiatrist. I was like, I don't remember how to play. I actually don't know how to play. I don't know how to do things that are just for fun, that there isn't an end goal. Like, I only do things that I'm good at. I don't do things that I'm not good at because I don't like not being good at things. It's like, so I prioritize the things that I'm good at, and I think a lot of people who are high achieving, who like that gold star at the end, are like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, but to keep your brain young, you have to try new things. And I'm someone who's very curious and inquisitive, but I think that this could be applicable to everyone. And I have to tell you, I told my mom what you had said, and it inspired her. My disabled mother took a road trip across the country, and I kid you not, I have seen her change. And it was like parts of herself that were missing when she got sick, she started to find again. And it like when my mom got sick, like I was 20, and for my mind, she kind of seemed like she had died. Like she was, what was my mom was no longer anymore. And so when she went on this road trip, she's in her 60s, she's disabled. She got in a car with 2 dogs and drove across the country. Because I told her, I was like, Mom, I talked to a neuroscientist who's studying Wanderlust, and you got to do this. So she did. And it inspired her to then tell her family members, who then were like, we want to do some things. And it's just a really cool thing that, that I learned from you, because I was like thinking about it, but then I was like, I don't know, this is like science according to Brittany, which means it's not science because it's just my brain thinking. But it's like, but to have that validated, I think that can really help a lot of people. So speaking of Wanderlust, you're currently working on a book about Wanderlust. Let's talk about that.
So the one place that I would let myself play when I was in the heart of all of my perfectionist hyperachieving tendencies was travel. Like, I would go to amazing places and have these, like, see all the museums, have all the experiences, eat the delicious food. Like, my brain would light up again. And I wanted to know why. And so when my husband and I were sitting in a cafe overlooking the Colosseum, we were talking about how it was the middle of summer. It was so freaking hot. It was miserable. The Uber driver was literally holding the steering wheel with oven mitts because it was that hot.
That's awful.
And we were like unhappy because we had just gone to see the Colosseum, and yet it was so hot. We only spent like 15, 20 minutes looking at it. And then we were like retreating to the gift shop because it was too hot everywhere else except for the air-conditioned gift shop. And we said, we have to come back. We have to come back when, it's not the middle of summer. But at the time, I was the principal of a school, and I can't take off for, 2 weeks in the middle of a school year. It's just not possible. So we started exploring, and he said, well, what if we take a year off? I'm like, you're insane. Like, this is not going to happen.
So this is your second gap year.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I love it.
And I needed it so badly. Like, back then, it was the thing that allowed me to see myself more clearly and allowed me to see that teaching was the path, not the research. Well, I was stuck again. I had like fallen all back into my old habits and tendencies, and I needed something to break that pattern. And so I said yes to the gap year, and we planned it out. We like finally extracted me from my job as a principal. I had a lot of like struggle with that because my identity was so wrapped up in my work. I was a total workaholic, much like you. And we took a year to travel. And again, that second gap year completely transformed and changed the way that I think. And so this time, though, I was applying a much more scientific lens to my own transformation as I was on that gap year. And so my book is about that. It's about how travel changes your brain. And then this new brain that I'm bringing home, what does that mean? What's possible now that wasn't possible before? How do I see the world now? And how can we open our mind, even in our daily lives, even in our everyday, even in my like 3,000 person town? How can I create the same kinds of mind-blowing, wonder-driven, beauty-driven experiences? How can I find adventure right here in my own backyard?
Yeah, it's so cool. And you had your kids with you too, you know?
I
It's like,
did.
so how was that experience traveling? Because they were teenagers, correct?
They were 9 and 13, 14
Okay.
when we were traveling.
So a preteen and a
So
teen.
they
Yeah.
were, yeah. This was my son's freshman year of high school and my daughter's fifth grade year.
That's so cool that you did that. That's so
Yeah.
cool. What lucky kids.
It was really amazing. One of the chapters is all about mother-daughter love. So there were several different family adventures that we had, both with my parents and obviously with my kids throughout. And that understanding of like what my brain was doing on that trip and how I was connecting with my kids in a way that I hadn't ever before. I kind of had outsourced a lot of my parenting to teachers. And finally, like I was taking that on myself. I could see them in a completely new way. And I think that it both solidified their relationship to one another and my relationship to them and my relationship to my mom. It was on that year that I went into the desert. That was the
Oh,
year.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
I love that. What a great story. It's such a great story. And I think that's so like applicable for people too, because, you know, not everybody has the ability to, you know, travel the world, but the fact that
Right.
you had like a neuroscientist who does that and then can come up with like practical, useful tips. I think so. You're really good at like talking about how to like real life practice. So like, so what are some things, I don't want to have you spoil your book, but what are some things that you're okay with sharing that you've already
Oh,
publicly talked about that could be applicable, like some like real life hacks that could be applicable to the listener?
so I think first and foremost, like if I was going to pick three, one of them of how to like bring your travel mind home would be to do whatever your next kind of like fun adventure is without your phone. Just leave your phone at home. We have such a tendency when we travel or have new experiences to want to take photos of it all to remember the moment, right? But if instead we don't have that crutch to rely on, and instead really intentionally say, I want to remember this moment. I need to remember this moment. And so instead of that, I'm going to check in with every single one of my five senses. I'm going to check in with my emotional state, and I'm going to burn that memory into my mind. It's so different as an experience. And in fact, Brittany, I think this is what you're doing with your podcast is that you're going beyond the portrait, right? You're going beyond just the photograph to add nuance and layer and memory and like all the sensory experience of a person that's so much richer than what you can capture. I mean, yes, a photo is worth 1,000 words, but the experience of it, like the taste and the smell and the memories and the emotions, that's where the heart of the matter lies. So that's number one.
100%. Well, I'm going to say one thing and then I want to hear these other ones. But that is
Yeah.
exactly why when I travel, I actually don't take pictures. And
Uh-huh.
so because I saw that movie, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and
Uh-huh.
it's, just in summary, it's the photo editor goes and finds the photographer because he lost, this roll of film that was his best work. And so he goes on this journey and it's like the hero's journey, as you've said that
Uh-huh.
before in your pod, except for there wasn't like an evil fiend he had to fight. But there's this one scene that it really sunk in my heart because, they find the snow leopard and Sean Penn, I think, was the photographer and who played the photographer. And the snow leopard walked by and he didn't take a picture. And Ben Stiller's character was like, we just hiked for like 3 days. Why didn't you take the picture? And he's like, well, that one was for me. And now I'm going to go take the picture. And it really, in my mind, it sunk in because I think because of that not belonging and not being, part of the world, very much photography had given me access. And so how
Yeah.
I participate in the world, I use it's through glass. And so there is a
Mm.
little bit of separation and there's always
Yep.
separation. And so when I
Yeah.
travel, I often will bring the camera just because if I don't have it, then I'm going to kick myself if there's a picture I want to take and
Uh-huh.
I don't have access to it because I have tried
Right.
that and I've regretted it. It's like, but I try not to take pictures because I experience life through glass. And so it's,
Yeah.
I think for someone who for a long time shut down emotions and who really needed, I really need to practice being present and kind of like
Right.
living. Like I don't live, I'm
Yes.
a workaholic who takes pictures of other people's lives,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that not having a camera and not having a phone in general is an exercise in presence. It's being right here, right now, with exactly what's in front of you, not worrying about capturing it for later, not worrying about like, oh, like this is something that I need to post on social media, or this is something that I need to look up all of the information about. It's just being there present in the moment. So I think that that's an exercise in presence. Another one to share is a practice that's drawn from a Harvard art historian who I can't remember her name, but what she does is she encourages her students every year to spend 3 hours with a single work of art. And it's an exercise in slowing down and noticing. And when you do that, so I did this when I was in New Zealand. I was with this gorgeous installation art piece called Indra's Bow. And I spent 3 hours with just my journal and this art. And what was so fascinating is like I did timestamps and just like noted what I was noticing. And at first it was, all the different colors. I got super into like what all of the different materials she was using, the way that the light was falling. But it took me so much time to really slow down and see all of the things that were built into this art piece. Because, I mean, every artist will spend hours and hours, days and days, months on a piece of art. And they're thinking about all of these things. But as an observer, you go into a museum, you look at a piece for, 10 seconds, not even that sometimes. You walk right by and you're like, oh, yeah, that was pretty. And then off you go. But the observation of beauty and the observation of like really what something is about and what this experience that the artist is creating for you, those layers come out so much later. And so I just love the forced slowing down because in our busy worlds, we're rushing all the time and we blow right by. But instead, this allowed my brain to really soak in the beauty of this piece and also to like feel it bodily rather than just think it mentally with my mind.
Yeah, which is useful.
Yeah.
Which actually, that does lead me to another question, and then we'll go back to your third one. But what does the brain, you and your podcast, which is amazing. Everyone, by the way, if you're not listening to Leaders Playground, you absolutely should because it is for everyone. And there's so many life hacks in there, like how to not be addicted to your phone. Yes, please. But anyway, side note, but you have a podcast episode where you talk about beauty and what the brain is doing when it sees beauty. And I absolutely would love for you to share that with the listener.
So there's two big theorists that have kind of shaped the field of the neuroscience of beauty. One is Andrew Chatterjee, and the other one is Samir Zeki. So Andrew Chatterjee looks at the experience of beauty by putting people into brain scanners and trying to understand when a person is in a brain scanner and looking at something that they rate as incredibly beautiful, what is it that's happening inside of their minds? And he's seeing that there's 3 different brain systems that all kind of light up at once, right? You've got your cognitive parts because you have to access memories that put the beauty into context. So the cognitive side is really pulling this memory system to the forefront and thinking about how does this experience relate to the other memories of my life? There's the emotional side. So you're also looking at what is it emotionally that's happening inside of your mind? What is the feeling state that's being generated? And oftentimes beauty is a sense of like delight or wonder or awe, but it can also have a darker side sometimes. Like there's dark beauty in a way that activates us in a very different way, but is still achingly beautiful. Like I remember going to see Pablo Picasso's Guernica, which is horror and war and destruction. And yet I just had so many chills over the emotional impact of that beauty, that dark beauty that you can get from those kinds of experiences. And I think that is one that we overlook a lot in terms of what beauty can be. And probably the least interesting of them is just the sensory systems, because beauty has a sensory nature to it that allows us to, again, be present in the moment with what's in front of us. So Andrew Chatterjee says when you have the sensory system, emotional system, and cognitive system all coming together around an experience, that's where the beauty lies. Semir Zeki has a slightly different take on it. He says that it's really about this one brain area. It's called the medial orbital frontal cortex. And it's one of those parts that's like literally like right above the eye socket, right? It's like kind of on the underside, but like right above and kind of in the middle of your brain. And it's and also a little bit in the front. But that part of your brain, when he looks at fMRI images, he sees almost consistently across all the different kinds of beauty that you might find that it's that one brain area that is the heart of beauty. He says that beauty, by definition, is the medial orbital frontal cortex lighting up. And that's a part of our brain that makes judgments. So it's the judgment center, which judges, is this beautiful or not? Is this tasty or not? Is this meaningful or not? And that you can't have the experience of beauty unless you're making some of those value judgments.
That's so fascinating. And I think for beauty, I completely agree. You have to have darkness to give shape. You have to have shadow. You have to have depth. If everything is too, if it's too bright or if it's too fluffy, then it's like trite, So for something, for it to be beautiful, not just pretty, but to be beautiful, there has to be, I'm like learning right now. I'm kind of like going through this phase of like learning about like duality, right? It's like, because I think people often are like, darkness is scary. And like, that's actually like deep-seated racism if you actually think about it, it's like, but you actually need to make a whole. You have to have all of the shades. You have to have shape. You have to have, the kind of like the shadows. And I have a Venus in Scorpio, so I'm a little dark and twisty on the inside. Like a lot of people don't believe me, but I'm like, no, I really like a dark and twisty thing. And I love a murder show. And, it's like, there's you have to have the darkness to give shape, it's like, and so that totally makes sense that, you're constantly making judgments. I think too, in your podcast episode, you mentioned the kind of the context is really important. So when you give them the idea that it's like something that was like, how about you share about that rather than me just paraphrasing you?
Tell me more about which part you're talking about.
About when they were studying people and it was the gallery versus the computer generated.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I love that study. So it's a study in which they put somebody into an fMRI machine, and they basically said, here's a whole bunch of images, and some of them were labeled computer because they were told that this was computer generated, that some other experimenter in the research group used Photoshop to kind of create these modern art pieces. And then a bunch of other ones were gallery, coming from a prestigious gallery in Amsterdam. And so they would put people in a brain scanner and say, okay, like which ones do you find more beautiful? And you'd see the picture and you'd see if it was computer or if it was gallery. And people would rate the painting, and then they would look at their brains and see, did the medial orbital frontal cortex light up or not? And probably unsurprisingly, the ones that were from the gallery, everyone was like, wow, those are beautiful. And they had a much higher beauty response and a much higher activity in that one brain area than when it was labeled computer. But all of the paintings were from the gallery.
They tricked them.
They just did it. I know, of course. Psychology researchers, that's what they do, right? And all of the paintings were from the gallery. But it's the framing of the painting that matters in our mind. And so when you see gallery, you're bringing up, again, certain memories, certain emotions, certain sensory experiences that come from gallery experiences. It elevates the art. So that's why music that you hear inside of a concert theater has a greater impact than what's coming out of your stereo. It's also why when you have a portrait inside of a frame and it's hanging on a wall, it's different than a pile of snapshots or like, flipping through pictures on your phone. You have just a very different experience of it because it's elevated, and that elevation allows you to slow down and be more present with it. But that doesn't mean that you can't take a photo on your phone and elevate it in a certain way. Or the music on your stereo, if you close your eyes and imagine that you're hearing it in a different setting, can bring it to almost the same levels of beauty. You just have to reframe it intentionally in your mind.
Well, and what I think is interesting too, it's, all of the pieces were gallery, but people made judgments on these other things because they were told that somebody else didn't value them in the same way that they valued these other ones. And how many times are we making rash judgments when you're like, oh, well, this person said that this is good, so it must be good, when there's something that's equally good, but it didn't have the kind of like sign off, it's like, or if there's something that's like one man's junk is another man's treasure, like that happens all the time in like antique stores, right? Where it's somebody doesn't know that it's very valuable, and then somebody else who does know finds it in an antique shop and they're like, I'll buy that, and then it's like worth thousands of dollars. It's like that happens all the time, So I think that it's interesting to kind of, if your brain is always making judgments, which are your judgments? Like, what do you like? And like that happens with movies. You're like, you saw a movie, everybody loved it, and you're like, that movie was totally garbage. Like, I hated that. It's like, but because everybody else liked it, you're like, I guess it was good and I just didn't get it. It's like, or you just didn't like it,
Well, Brittany, I think that that's your gift, is that you can see and reframe a person or a scene or a setting in such a way that you can bring out the beauty and you can capture it for other people to appreciate. Because we would walk right by, a beautiful house or this one person. And yet by you with your eye toward light and color and then the person within or the space within, you can elevate it for us. And I love that that's what you do.
Yeah, I mean, that is my gift. And I think that comes from, my post-traumatic growth, it's like, it was like always like finding what was beautiful or special about something, and then finding a way to like make it work for me. It's like, that's kind of like the alchemy side, it's like, so finding the ingredients and being like, okay, this is what we have to work with. How do we make it better? Or how do we have the message more clear? And I think like when I'm shooting portraits, I mean, I photographed you, all my tricks now, it's like, but that's the thing. Like I was able to, like, I asked you a lot of questions because especially with really smart people, I have to overwhelm their nervous system to get them out of their head, because everybody's self-conscious. Everybody hates getting their picture taken. And so I will flood your brain. Especially that was hard. I was like, I'm doing this to a neuroscientist and she totally knows what I'm doing to her. But anyway, it's fine. But it's like, but I would bounce you around like in terms of emotions, and it was like all over the place. And I would kind of, because it would get you out of your insecurities, because everybody hates getting photographed, especially photographers. We know it's awful, right? So it's like, so how do you do it is you get them out of their head, and then you just start having a conversation with someone, and then you kind of forget that you've got a giant lens in your face, it's like, so I think that's how I work. But I think that it's like that's just my particular skill. But yeah, I think that kind of the finding the beauty, it's a skill that I think I had an earlier episode with Jeremiah Brent, and that's his gift, is finding the beauty no matter the circumstance, and that also stemmed from his childhood, and always like searching for the beauty, because you can always find something that's beautiful, but it's a muscle that you have to work with. And I think that rather than like giving up your power and saying like, oh, these people think this is good and this is bad, no, like think about it. Like, what do you actually want? And I love that it's the brain is lighting up. And I think that that's also interesting too, in terms of like culturally, it's like when you're told, there's trends of like what's beautiful, and you like look at the 90s and we all had like skinny eyebrows, and like it's all coming back again. It's like, but then you look at like the trends now, and it's like it's because society is re-encouraging certain types of beauty standards, right? And so that's how your brain is now making those judgments. So even if that person, of course everybody is beautiful, but it's like, but if they don't fit those certain like standards, then they might, internalize that, when it's like, actually it's like, it's just like what you're being fed. Like the brain is a machine that you're being fed information, but you know how to hack it, which is why we have a neuroscientist on the show. How do you hack the brain? It's like, I think it's so interesting. So I want to go back and talk about the science of play and learning to thrive and not just survive, because that's a key tenet in your work. And I think that is something that a lot of people need more play. I think especially Americans are too serious and work too hard. And, I want to hear about why it actually helps your brain and then you end up being more like successful and more productive. We also have to talk about the multitasking thing, because when I did your experiment and I was like, damn it, Irene, this is really hard. So let's do that too. Maybe we will do the experiment so I don't have to like be an idiot in front of everybody. But I think it's good to hear about the brain science anyway.
Well, in terms of play, the current thinking of how play benefits us is that it engages what's called a flow state. So it's one of those states of being where you're kind of in the zone, but it's a creative, always like the stakes aren't too high kind of way of experimenting with new things. And so remember how I was talking about like the central executive network and the default mode? The central executive needs opportunities to play in order for it to do its job well, to be able to think creatively, to be able to come up with new solutions to problems. And play is this sandbox where we can experiment without the stakes being too high. And so play really is this natural thing that we are born to be able to do. And as we get older, we often forget what it's even like to play. I was on a coaching call with somebody, and it was an older woman in their 60s, and she had completely forgotten how to play. And she couldn't divorce like her playful self with the like responsible adult that she's become. And at the end of the call, it was all about, you know what I really need to do is just go sit in the sun and to let go of the to-do list and let go of all of the things that I feel like I should be doing or the things people are expecting of me. And all I need to do is just go sit outside in the sun. And we forget to give ourselves permission to do that sometimes. I know I did. I forgot to give myself permission to do that for like 40 years. And so getting back in touch with that playful side allows the thinking part of our brains to actually flourish the way that it's meant to, the way that we can have creative solutions and not get so drawn into the overwhelm and the exhaustion and the constant to-do list and the weight of responsibility that ends up falling on our shoulders. And all of the expectations of society and other people, we can start to free ourselves if we give ourselves just a little bit of room to play.
I mean, that's so helpful. And so like, what is the brain, like you can't really make good decisions, right? Because when you're too tired or you're too overworked or you're too overwhelmed. And, we thankfully did a session and you told me it was my limbic system was taking over. And so I was not able to make the decisions that I wanted to make because my limbic system was like, we're not safe. We're in fear mode. Now, like I'm taking over. And now adult Brittany is not able to use adult Brittany's brain. Now it's little Brittany, inner Brittany, who is like terrified, who can't, who's now taking over and now she's screaming at you. So I think, let's talk a little bit about that. I'm kind of bouncing all over, but I think it's
perfect.
But that's, I think how it kind of all flows together, like I think like, let's maybe talk about little Irene, Hermione, and Draco. For those that don't know, Irene has a really amazing tool that she uses to kind of help bring all of these parts. So when she has the overthinker brain or the perfectionist brain and the inner negative self-talk and all of that. So let's talk about that.
So my little inner voices, I rely heavily on Richard Schwartz and his kind of framework of internal family systems, though of course I do it more playfully and creatively. So he talks about, different parts of ourselves, because every single one of us is having like little internal conversations. Like a part of me wants to do that and a part of me wants to do this, and we're in conflict with ourselves. That client that I mentioned, she had this delighted, playful child that she'd suppressed and this very responsible adult that she had prioritized. And those parts were in conflict with themselves. And so we often have these like little inner voices, this self-critic that like says, you're just not good enough. All of those things happen inside of our minds. And by personifying them, by giving them depth and character and understanding, you can have a much greater self-awareness and also a lot more self-compassion. So I named my little inner parts. So I have my inner child, who I named Little Irene. I have my perfectionistic hyperachiever person, who's I named Hermione, because, Harry Potter, and she's like the ultimate overachiever, perfectionist planner.
We all were Hermione.
I know. And then I have a Draco Malfoy, who is the sneering bully who always says I'm not good enough, but is also like hugely ego driven and wants to be the best at everything and demands that if I'm not going to be like number one at a thing, that why are you even bothering? Why would you even try? Right. So it both pushes me and then also says, well, that was crap. That was worthless. So it has this like dual tendency. So those are like the primary characters. And so it helps me to think about them as advisors in my mind, each one with a dark side and a light side. Just kind of like you were saying, you can't understand the dark without the light or the light without the dark. Hermione has both flip sides. There are some times where she totally shines. There are some times where that overwhelm and the exhaustion that comes from that achieverism and the perfectionism kind of takes over. So being able to understand the depth of her character, it's almost like doing a character study of the different voices in my head and understanding them for who they are and what they really want. And how do I then manage my inner voices in a much more clear way? And the playful way that I do it is when I look over there, I have like 3 little bobbleheads. I've got a little Irene and a Hermione and a Draco. For some of my clients, I've taken them for a walk in the park and I have them collect objects that represent their inner boardroom, their inner characters. And different analogies will relate to different people, but that client that I took for a walk in the park, she still has as the phone background for everything that she looks at every single day is the picture she took of all of those different parts of herself, because it gives you a little bit of distance and so much more awareness of what those pieces are. And they're just all subconscious parts of our mind. The only conscious linguistic part is our cognitive side. But when we can take some of those emotional pieces, like the limbic system, or even some of the like subconscious, like automatic kind of things, like habits and the instincts that are built into us, how can we put names and words and character to them and depth to them so we can see them in their fullness?
That's so interesting too, because I think, people they like shame themselves when they're not doing things the way that they think that they should, right? Or it's like that ideal, I have to be the perfect this, I have to be the perfect that. Or if they like, especially if I find, at least for myself as a high achiever, making mistakes, especially as a recovering, ex-Mormon, I'm an ex-Mormon. So it's like making mistakes was like, not like, I don't like making mistakes. And so, but it's like stupid, right? You like need to be able to make mistakes. That's the life journey, is you have to learn from these things. But it's interesting to me that I'm like quite fascinated by neural pathways and like how to create new neural pathways,
Right.
and the necessity that you have to kind of have that wholeness that you were talking about before, that in order to make better decisions as a grown up that are more like aligned with what you want for your life, you have to give yourself a rest, you have to give yourself a break, you have to have time to play, because there's actual brain science that is telling you you are not going to be able to make good decisions when you're exhausted or when you're tired, or, you know, and I think parents, you know, when they have children, they're always like, oh, just add water, right? Like give them a drink, give them like playtime in the water or a shower, or, and that kind of like takes them out of like, let them play in the water. And then they like go back, the kids stop having the tantrums, you know? And like we're human beings with these brains, you know, not that I need to be going on a tangent and explaining this to you because you already know this, but you know, it's like, but that's sometimes how I process information. You know, it's like, it's like, okay, so when I am, you know, have my inner, you know, critic, it's because I'm trying to learn something from it. And there are certain parts of my brain that are now taking over. And so we have to bring those parts in wholeness so that you can harness them, because that also, like if you get too comfy, that's not good either. So maybe that inner critic is like, you should be doing, you know, like trying to expand, right? Like that can maybe come in handy, right? And like then Hermione, who's like the overachiever, well, yeah, when you have a to-do list to get done, it's good, it's a good time to activate her, you know, but then also she needs to have a little break and let playtime happen, you know? So I think that's really useful information.
I think that one of the tools that I give to my clients, and that I don't even think I've brought onto my podcast yet, but I will, is understanding that emotions and all of those little inner voices have so much wisdom if we're just willing to listen to them. And so the first step is really just being able to name your emotion. Like, what emotion is this that I'm feeling? Because if you're anything like me, my emotional vocabulary was super stifled. I had the academic vocabulary for it, but could I name an emotion that I was feeling inside of me right now? No. I could study it. I could like recognize how the different facial muscles look like for this one versus the other. Do I know how that feels on my own face? Absolutely not. But if you can first like even just recognize that I'm having this emotion, then to allow myself to feel it, and then to gain the wisdom from it, that's an entirely different experience. And I've been going through that very recently. A dear, dear friend of mine passed away suddenly, unexpectedly. It was horrible. But like, I've been crying a lot lately because of the grief that I'm feeling and the loss and the sadness of losing a dear friend. And in the past, those are emotions that I would just shunt aside and not tap into and not pay any attention to and ignore as much as possible because they were uncomfortable. They sucked. But emotions only last, like the deep emotions, like a wave of emotion is only, 2 minutes long on average. They're really short. And yes, like grief in particular can have multiple waves, but like the big wave will crest and fall within 2 minutes. So I can give myself 2 minutes to feel. That's okay. So when I can do that, and then I can both name the feelings that I'm feeling, and then start to allow myself, I'm human. I just lost somebody dear to me. Of course I'm feeling this way. This is a normal human experience. I'm not weird. I'm not horrible. I'm not bad for crying. And then like what I'm learning from all of this, the understanding that I'm gaining is that this sadness is about the loss of something dear. It pinpoints the places where something really matters. And this person really matters. But by coming out with this lesson that the sadness is pointing me to what really matters in life, it's allowed me to really spend more time with my kids, with my husband, with my dear friends. Because who knows if this is the last time I'm going to get to see them. So like, I don't need to be working late at night. I can't be, because what's really most important is these people.
Well, and it's interesting that you're like, you get sick. Like I used to be really good at like hiding emotions and just being a robot until I wasn't good at it anymore. And then my emotions just started boiling over because I had suppressed them for so long. And, and I have this mind body disconnect. And so like learning how to feel emotions in the body is
Yeah,
really hard. It's like, because you're
it
not used
is.
to it, but it's a skill that you have to learn. And I think, like, I think emotional regulation and things like anger and think about like busyness, right? How many
Mm-hmm.
people can't sit still without looking at their phone for 5 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard. Why is
Mm-hmm.
that? And I know when I was, starting to like overflow with emotions, my phone addiction like massively went up. And I remember I
Mm-hmm.
was sitting in a doctor's office and I was like just waiting, and I was like, let's see how long I can go without looking at my phone. And it felt like an eternity. And it was 2 minutes. 2 minutes
Yeah.
had passed.
Yeah.
And I was like, girl doesn't want to be alone in her thoughts. It was like, and that
Mm-hmm.
was my avoidance coming through, So I
Mm-hmm.
think like being busy, but it's the brain. The brain is like, you're not bringing in all of the parts. So that's when, like you mentioned to me before, like it was my limbic system was taking over, and the limbic system doesn't have words, but it's giving
Right.
signals. And so
Yep.
it's not letting me make adult decisions.
Yeah. In particular, it's the dopamine pathways that are driving that wanting and the craving for your phone. Like I can recognize that. I mean, that was actually the topic of my thesis project, right? My PhD thesis was all about the dopamine pathways and how context and environmental cues and mental cues will drive somebody towards a seeking and a wanting of a phone or a distraction or whatever was the pre-programmed habitual behavior that would start to alleviate that, right? And a lot of times it's just boredom or the overthinking is going to be driving us towards, okay, well, here's an easy place where I can get relief from the overthinking, the worrying, the like boredom. And so what you do is you have to pre-program a different set of neural pathways. So let's make those ones, the phone ones, harder to access, make them unappealing, unattractive, unrewarding. And instead, how can I make a different set of practices? And the ones that I'm using are a lot of mindfulness practices. How can I make mindfulness practices my go-to for satisfying that same urge in a much more healthy, much more satisfying, rewarding way?
I love that. And I think that's applicable to a lot of people. Everybody's
Mm-hmm.
addicted to their phones. It's like a competition at how busy somebody is, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways to be busy. It's like, I mean, you don't have to be necessarily a professional. Like a stay at home mom is like a million things that they're doing, which leads me
Mm-hmm.
to the multitasking, because
Right.
when I listened to your episode about the multitasking, I was like, this makes so much sense, because I do have CPTSD and there is a
Yeah.
lot of overlap with ADHD. I didn't know that didn't know I had that. And so, because it shows up with women differently, but it's the hyper focus that when I heard about the hyper focus, I was like, oh, because I do that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes sense, because when you have a lot of things, when I'm doing a lot of things at once, I then, a day goes by, I'm like, what did I even get done today? So I normally have to like hyper focus, and then I'm very, very productive. So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about, we don't have to do the experiment because I want people to listen to your episode, but what can you talk about? Like, it is a myth that you can multitask successfully. Like,
Can't.
it's not good.
Mm-mm. Yep. Your brain can only really, so in addition to central executive and default mode, there's what's called the attention salience network. And that one is the one that says, this is the most salient, most attention grabbing thing. I'm going to focus there. You can't have more than one thing in the spotlight of your attention salience network. It doesn't happen. You only got one. And so, where do you shine that spotlight? If you're shining that spotlight on like 8 different things, you're trying to multitask on 8 different things, you're not actually looking at a bunch of different things. In fact, you're just switching from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and back again. And so then your attention span gets shrunk down to these like tiny little snippets. And that's what happens when, you're trying to listen to a podcast and do your email and also like sort of pay attention to a webinar that's going on in the background. You can't do it. Your brain just doesn't have the capacity. Instead, you switch from one to the next to the next. And when you try to do that, your brain literally gets exhausted. So the amount of like, ATP that and glucose and things, those all get used up and your brain just goes into shutdown exhaustion mode. It can't continue to function until it gets some rest and restoration. And so you've really got to be able to disconnect and either really focus on one thing and letting the rest go. And that I think is probably the most important lesson that I've learned, both from the gap year and all the other things, is I really need to identify what are the most important things to me. And whatever those are, that's where I'm going to put my attention, and I've got to let the rest go. And it's uncomfortable. It's like so hard not to get my entire to-do list done every single day. But my to-do list is like miles long. And there's no way ever I'm going to get the whole to-do list done. Like, it's a complete myth that one day I'm going to get to the bottom of my to-do list and then I can have a vacation. Like, that just doesn't happen. So instead, what are the most important things? And how can I keep my attention and time and energy focused on those? And by doing that, my God, like, it's been life-changing.
Well, because you actually get more done. So it's like, so rather than being spread so thin, when you have an hour and a half block, like 90-minute blocks, which is,
Yeah.
you know, the suggestion, it's like,
Right.
yeah, when you do things in 90 minutes and then you take a little break, which, whether that's a different activity, like I like that you like will make banana bread or you'll go take a walk at the park, you know, it's like, you know, I think a lot of people that could be really helpful. And I think like one of your tricks that you use is if it's like checking email and social media, like you put lots of things that are like those little things, like your communication hour, you know, and it's like, and I love that. I think that's such a like a helpful tool, but I like hearing that it's like, this is the way to like, not like hack your brain, but like work with that flow state that you were talking about before, that it's like, this is how the brain works. So why are we trying to force it to do something that it's actually not meant to do? Like we should work with how it's meant to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, why are we trying to suppress our emotions? Our emotions are supposed to be expressed. Let yourself express them. Why are we trying to multitask and do, like, you know, keep our attention focused on 8 different things at once? No, our brains are meant to focus on one thing. Let's focus on one thing. We have cycles and patterns both through our day and our lives. Why are we trying, like when we have, you know, crying babies at home, trying to like be the most productive and climb the career ladder? No, like, let's work with the patterns and the actual natural cycles of our longer lives as well as our daily rhythms, and work with our brains rather than against them. And by doing so, it like frees up so much of that wasted time and energy in the fighting. And instead, we can just go about the living.
I mean, living that, what an idea, you know, actually living, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be conscious of your time. So I have just a couple things left to ask you.
Okay.
So
Fire away.
all right. So what would you say, you're part of my Siren Song project. What would you say your Siren Song is and your legacy for this lifetime?
I think my legacy, if like people could remember me for one thing, it's what I said at the beginning. I want people to thrive. So many of us are in this survival mode where we're rushing and like suppressing or hiding or fearful. How can we turn that into something that's thriving and joyful and adventure filled and beauty filled? Like, that's what I want people to be in both their work and in their play and all of it.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. What advice would you give your younger self, whether that's a teenager or just a child or even 10 years ago?
You know, it's not advice. Isn't this funny? What I would do is, if I could go back to that moment where I was like recognizing my authentic self back in middle school, I would simply go and sit with her and like let her know that this was perfect. That being authentic, being like joyful, loving the science, that just being is beautiful and perfect, and not to get caught up in all of those other things. But it's more of a state of being than it is advice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that
it's
is
acceptance.
beautiful.
It's allowing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Where would you envision yourself in 5 years?
So the funny thing is, when I came back from the gap year, I thought I would come back with like all these big ideas of like all the things I want to achieve and whatnot. Really? Like, I want to be exactly where I am right now. Like, not exactly. like it's going to grow and evolve and change, but I don't need to live in a new place. I thought that I did. I thought I had to move out of this like crazy little podunk like rural town. I don't. Like, I don't feel like I need anything more than what I've already got, except to nurture what I have and let it grow like a garden. And I thought that maybe I had to travel more, take another gap year, and I don't. People always ask, like, where are you going next? And I'm like, you know what? I don't know, and I don't really care. I'm loving where I am right now.
That's admirable. Feeling content. For someone, like, I am always eye on the prize, and when I achieve, I don't even acknowledge that I've achieved it because I'm already on to the next thing. So like being content is a big lesson that I'm trying to learn.
Yeah. So remember how I had like a couple practices? The third practice is savoring.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
It's like savoring and being grateful for exactly what you've got. Like to focus that right now where I'm at, my home, like I thought I hated my home. I thought I was scared of it. I didn't like it. And now, like, I can't imagine anywhere better. Somebody asked me, like, name your favorite places on the planet because I was in a room full of travel writers, right? And they were all naming all of these amazing things, the Galapagos and Istanbul and, you know, Bali. Like they were naming all of these incredible places all over the world. And I was like, honestly, my favorite place is home. I love my home.
I love that. I love that. And I think a lot of people use travel as a way to escape their lives rather than find wonder. And I think like learning the skill to create wonder wherever you are, whether that's in your home or whether that's you're at the park or if you're, you know, like visiting family and they're driving you crazy or, you know, it's like finding that kind of wonder. There's lots of ways you can do that doesn't cost a lot of money. You know, it's like you can absolutely do it, but it's a skill that has to get developed. Especially
in this era of like climate crisis and mental health decline and all of those things. Those lessons are priceless. Like you can find all the joy you want at home. It doesn't mean that travel doesn't offer amazing opportunities. It does. It changes the way you see the world. So by all means, like it's an important thing. But is it the only thing? Is that the only place you can find it? No.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. All right, so our last question. So you know I always ask people to think of their secret delight. That's supposed to stay a secret. So don't worry, you don't have to reveal it. But what is your not so secret delight or something that is delighting you this week or anytime?
Dungeons and Dragons.
I love it. I love it. I love it, nerd.
I love D&D. It is the best game ever. I love playing it. I love like being the dungeon master. I love like creating the imaginary worlds in my head. I love it.
I love D&D. That. I love that. This was so fun, Irene. Thank you so much for being here.
I loved it. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure. I want everybody to come and to find you. So how can people find you?
Best place is on my website, irenesalter.com. Super easy. But like, I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. So find me there. I'm again at Irene Salter.
Fantastic. And then your podcast is Leaders Playground, and that you can find everywhere. And then and your business name, which I really love, is Inquiring Minds. Yeah. The Inquiring Minds want to know, how do you thrive, not just survive? Well, thank you, Irene.
Thank you, Brittany.
Oh, this was such a pleasure. So
we have to keep like in touch and keep talking because I just get so happy chatting with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I could talk to you all day. It's one of those things where I got to rein it in. So I will come visit and we'll have like a super long hangout.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Thank you. Oh, you're the best.
All right. Big hugs.
Big hugs. Bye, darling.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoyed this podcast, which I hope you did, please subscribe. And if you would like to leave a review, you may or may not get name dropped in the next episode. We love to reward a gold star at the end. I'm a gold star girl myself. All right. If you'd like to follow along with my socials, Brittany Ambridge across the board. And my website is the same. And then the credits, we have beautiful cover art by Stephanie Brookler and my producer, big thanks to him, Juan Paulini Diaz.